really excited to introduce our next speaker. I've been looking forward to talking with her all week. Marie Roker-Jones is the co-founder of Esteem. Now, Esteem is a turnkey solution that helps companies turn their sustainability commitments into real actions, measurable results, and positive social impact. Now, Marie helps companies bridge their good intentions to measurable actions, which we know is much harder said than, or much easier said than done. Now, Marie also built the Black Women Project, Black Woman Project, which hopefully we'll get to talk to her about later, as an ode to Black women, because in her words, we're always working on multiple projects and we need community in order to grow. So Marie, I'm so excited to meet you and get to speak with you today. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Megan. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Okay, so all right, let's try and dive in. I know that a lot of us might have a vague idea of what it means to say I have a chronic illness, or that someone has a chronic illness or lives with a chronic illness. My like frame of reference is that my husband is a type 1 diabetic, and I relate to that pretty strongly because I have a chronic mental health condition. Now, obviously not the same thing, but for those of us that don't maybe have a personal touchstone when it comes to chronic illness, what should people know about this if they are looking in from the outside? What does it look like? What does your struggle look like? And how do you cope with it?
That's a great question. I think what's the most challenging about having a chronic illness is that physically, and whether this chronic illness is mental illness or physical illness, it's still that when people see you, the assumption is that you're fine and that you look well. So there seems to be this misconception that, you look fine, so then you must be okay. And, but that internal struggle for yourself. And I think one of the most difficult parts is that those of us who do have a chronic illness, we tend to put on a brave face. We tend to put on this mask that not only, I think it makes other people feel comfortable. I think we do it so that we don't have to deal with a lot of the questions, and also so that we can prove that, still have the energy and the motivation to do, whether it's at work or at home. And so I think we have these internal struggles ourselves with how do we present ourselves in the world, which can be difficult.
No, 100%. I mean, I feel like, especially when it comes to these like sort of invisible illnesses, you're right. It kind of highlights even more so, at least in America, the problem that most people have connecting mental health with physical health, right? If you don't look sick, then you must be fine. So when we're talking about these kinds of things and those struggles, just as a personal question, do you find that you have a lot, I won't say wrapped up in, that sounds like diminutive, but do you struggle with language when you're trying to explain to people about your illness? I struggle when it comes to whether it's something I have versus something I am, and for me, at least, it turns into, I have bipolar disorder. And so it turns into kind of, well, that's your one character trait. So what is your experience like with this?
It's the same thing, is because on one hand, this is something that it's part of who you are, but you don't want it to be your identity. So the struggle really is, and you mentioned your husband has type 1 diabetes. And that's, for example, you say that someone has diabetes, not that they're diabetic, because then that becomes the label, right? Then that's all you see. And so, and taking your example, you have bipolar, but you don't want it to be your only identity, because there's so much more to who you are. So it's the same thing with all these invisible illnesses. You have it, but it's not who you are. It's not, it's part of your growth and part of you as you move through this world and learn more about yourself and your relationships with others. But it doesn't have to be the key thing and the focus on your everyday life, even if it is a struggle that you have to deal with every day. You just don't want people to identify you as this person, because then that's all they see and they forget everything else, right?
Yes.
And so, and that's how you feel that you're introduced, even though you're not, you feel like there's a part of people that want to introduce you this way as this person. And somehow you become the spokesperson for everyone who has the same illness. And you're just like, no, I can only speak on my behalf, and I can only speak about what I struggle with. And also, this is not my identity. This is, again, it is part of me, and it's part of who I am right now. And so it's, it's hard. It's hard. I'll just
It
say
is,
this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
It's
especially when you're trying to balance that idea, like you said, trying to impress on people, like, no, this is a real thing. This really impacts my day-to-day life. You're right. It's a very hard balance to maintain between making sure that people kind of understand not severity, but like how much this impacts so much else in your life
yeah,
without it being the only thing about you. And
exactly.
it's very hard.
It is, exactly. And also for yourself, like what are the internal, messages you say to yourself, and how do you manage that, right? Like what do you say to yourself that gets you through the day, so that when you're having like a flare up or an episode or something, how do you manage that? Because that also tends to show through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about, all of this as it functions in the workplace.
Sure.
How do you think that living with a chronic illness has changed your experience in terms of, maybe in contrast to people who are not afflicted or not living with some type of chronic condition?
I think there's two things. One is cultural too, right? I come from a culture of you push through, you show you're strong. This does not break you down. And having to, I guess, choose between, who am I going to be today? Am I going to show up as the strong person, or am I going to be honest with myself and others and be vulnerable, be transparent and say, look, it's not a great day. I may need a couple of days. I'm still healing. And sometimes you don't want to even say those words because you feel like the other person, like a burden. I think that's the hard part, especially at work. When you work with a team, you understand that if you have a chronic illness, there'll be times where you can't give your 100%. And I think that's what people need to understand, particularly in the workplace. Your best is going to look different from day to day. And getting people to see that and understand that is again another challenge. One of the other things, like for me, and it's so funny because this happened the last time I had the power to fly. One of the treatments that I get, it affects, my ability to think of the words that I want to say. And so I have to be conscious of that, so that if I'm in a meeting, I have to prepare myself, or I have to tell my team, in my case, my co-founder, look, I cannot do this today. I need you to lead. And if you need me to say something, I will, but I really need you to show up for me today because I can't. And again, is it comfortable for me? No. Is it something that I feel, but I do feel that it matters. And I feel like it's important because I think being transparent and being honest is it's key to you developing these relationships. It's key to your team better understanding. And it also, addresses some of that resentment that may come up when people think, oh, she says she's not sick. Well, how come she was so great yesterday and today she's not? So there's that lack of understanding. And honestly, sometimes a lack of empathy too.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, so I struggled with this even earlier this week. So you talked about kind of how you sort of feel guilty. And I want to go back to this idea of transparency and how that's necessary. But personally, I end up feeling like if I explain it accurately, I'm somehow like soliciting special treatment or like trying to manipulate the people around me, when it's like, no, that's not what it is. And I know that logically, but it's really hard to do. What was it like when you first started with that, kind of being at least so in the mental health community, but a lot of the time we talk about it as masking. Now, I don't know if that's similar within physical or chronic physical conditions, but what was that like when you first started?
It's the same thing. It was the masking. And I want to address something too, because one thing we don't say, and we should talk about, is that many times that physical chronic illness does lead to a mental health illness too. So that's something we don't say out loud enough. And I know a lot of, particularly like for me, I have an autoimmune, and other people in the community who have different autoimmune, disease, and depending on the severity of their disease, they struggle with mental health and do have to take like antidepressants. So that's something to be conscious of too. If you're working with someone, they're not just dealing with the physical aspect, they might be dealing with the mental too. So for me, what it was like was, it hurts for me to say this. When I first was diagnosed, I worked for an organization that was mostly women. And I remember the external message was about how we support women. Internally, I didn't get that. And I think that was the hardest part for me was I didn't want to seem like a drama queen, right? Because I'm not feeling well. So it's like, oh, here she goes again. She looks fine. Like, what is it this time? And so I would, I did something that was really not even necessary. I literally, the day after getting my treatment, was emailing, and I was off. I didn't have any reason to. I just didn't want to show that, you know what, I'm not letting you down. I'm here. I've got this. Even though mentally and physically I didn't have it. I don't even know if those emails made sense, but I felt compelled to show up. I felt compelled to say, here, I got you. I am not going to let you down. And I don't even know why I cared, to be honest.
It's very hard, at least for me, it is very hard to shake that idea of either not like disappointing people or not seeming reliable. That just crushes me, because you're right. Like when it comes to team stuff, if you were, let's say you were having like problems with fainting, if there was a chance that you would just sort of like in the middle of the day, you tell the people around you, because that's going to impact your work, but it's also going to have an effect on them. But when it comes to these kinds of issues where they are less visible, it is very, very hard to kind of break that stigma. Now, when you started, kind of being more honest and opening up and not masking,
Yeah.
Have you always been this, kind of this transparent with disclosure to an employer or to your team?
No, I never. I'm a very private person. So for me to even talk about it, first of all, it took me 3 years to get a proper diagnosis. Let's start there. And then on top of that, it took a lot for me to even talk about it, because I felt like, oh, I don't want to be the poster child for this. And I don't want people to think or make assumptions. And I don't want them to think I can no longer be this leader and do the work.
Yeah.
And so I realize now, none of that matters, right? I realize now that even, as I mentioned with the mental health, there are times where I have to mentally prepare myself for my treatment. And I'm dealing with depression because I can't get out of bed and I don't want to deal with anything and I want to shut the world out. And how do you say that to an employer? How do you say that to your co-founder? That
Right?
it's just that right now mentally, I can't cope and I need some time. And I remember the first time I had to say it out loud, even though it felt like, oh, I'm free, at the same time, I felt that guilt you mentioned, because I felt I was letting people down, and that, I'm fickle or like you said, unreliable, and you just don't know when she's going to be sick, right? It's just this narrative has to change for not just us, but for the people around us. And I would say this, like HR and employers, to be conscious of it and to honestly understand it and speak to someone if they're willing to be open, so that you have a better understanding what people deal with. Because if somebody goes to HR and says, oh, this person is not pulling through, they're taking time off, is this really affecting our team? You have to have that empathy and understand what a chronic illness looks like. And
Yes.
if you don't have that deep understanding, you're just going to fall into this trap of, yeah, I don't know, maybe this person is sick. I can't figure it out. So
yeah, well, context obviously is key, and people don't have that unless you kind of open up about it. I don't know that I've met anyone with a chronic condition that has always been upfront and transparent about it. And I feel like, yeah, a lot of it has to do with that stigma, but I feel like also a lot of it for me has to do with like not wanting to basically tell somebody like, okay, well, I can't do this, but you should value my contributions. And here's the ways I'm willing to go out on a limb and do stuff that's really not super great for my mental health or my physical health, but I'm willing to do this because despite insert condition here, I'm a good employee. And it's like having to like prove that all of the time.
Exactly. And it's what's so funny about that is if you have a migraine, right? People in the workplace will say, you know, right now I have a migraine. And other people will feel compassion for that because it's something they can relate to. Or if you say my stomach hurts or right now I feel stressed. For some reason, we throw those words out and people are just like, yeah, I get that. But because they can't understand or relate to what you're going through, there's this wall. And so they're just trying to figure out what exactly is wrong with you, you know, and why is this a problem for you?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Yeah, because again, you have good days and bad days. And I think that's what makes it difficult is that
yes,
you can have a week that's great. And the following week is not. And so people tend to feel confused about what is going on here. And is she telling the truth? Is he telling the truth? Or are they telling the truth? I don't know.
Oh yeah. That one's big for me. I think that to myself a lot. Like, okay, am I having a depressive episode? Am I swinging into depression, or am I just a little bit lazy? Because that's the lie I told myself forever. So, you know, it's especially when you have something that's got these incredibly like physical repercussions involved, it can be really confusing for people, right? Because they don't really understand that like every day is a potentially terrible surprise for you too. So kind of getting people to understand where you are and being okay with saying, hey, here's what today looks like. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, and neither do you. But when I know, I will tell you. I will communicate this because whatever, you know, I guess we'll send out an all points bulletin once there's any news. Okay, so we're getting some questions in on the chat. I absolutely love these. I want to try and make sure we get to these. Now, the second part of this question about kind of disclosure, do you think that it's always necessary?
No, I think that is a personal decision. And unfortunately, and this is what I think is hard, is that people will say, employers will say, you know, we're equal opportunity, but there's still some bias around chronic illness. There's still some bias around disabilities. So you feel like, should I disclose or shouldn't I disclose? And I feel that if it's something that is debilitating and you think that it would help your employer to know, then you have to really make that decision and take your time to think through, how am I going to present this? Am I going to have a plan in hand? Am I going to have to explain everything? Or again, doctor's appointments, those are other things that come up. So should I let them know I'm going to have all these doctor's appointments? So really, it has to be a matter of how much, it's really about like, do you feel like you trust your employer? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel like this won't be used against you? So I really say it's a personal decision, and trust your instincts, because that's really what gets us through these moments, is being able to say, does this feel right for me? And if you're new to a job, feel it out first, because you don't want to start talking and then again you become labeled, oh, that's the person who's sick, all the time.
Yeah.
Let's be
No.
honest. I mean,
Yeah,
this is
no.
people and human nature. So it could be, oh, yeah, she's always out. I don't know what's wrong with her.
Yeah. Well, and for me, especially like when I first started the relationship I had with my husband, I didn't know anything about chronic illnesses. I didn't know anyone who was diabetic. I didn't know anyone who dealt with any chronic condition long term, other than something like cancer or things like that. So one of the things that was really, really helpful for me, I honestly went to the ADA website because I had so many questions about like, what does this actually mean? Because I feel like when people think about the Americans with Disabilities Act, you think wheelchair ramps, you think like the auditory beeping that goes with crosswalks, and all of those things are necessary, important, should absolutely be protected. But when it comes to something like this, where it's not quite as simple as here's the hole that needs filling, okay, here's a round peg to go in it, you don't even know what shape the hole is. You don't know if the hole is vertical or horizontal or in some like fourth dimension that you can't even see. Like, it's nuts, right? Now, we have a lot of people asking questions when it comes to, and really echoing what you're saying about you have to have that trust. Lisa Pena had said, you have to worry about if they'll violate your HIPAA privileges with others inadvertently through gossip, which is a very real concern and absolutely sucks. We also got a really good question from Kayla that I want to float up here. Kayla says, I recently got a new job and I experience chronic pain. It's usually mild, but some days my body feels inflamed. I would love to know what's the best way to communicate to your new employer that you might need more flexibility on not going into the office 5 days a week, going to doctor's appointments more than twice a month, blah, blah, blah. Now, obviously this is going to change from employer to employer, but how did you handle this when you were trying to impress these kinds of things on, your manager or HR or your team? I'm always really interested to hear the language people use. I learned more stuff this past weekend speaking with a different future speaker for today's summit as well. So I'm really interested to see how you handle this.
Sure. Yeah. I went to my immediate supervisor and I went to her in confidence. And it wasn't like we had this great relationship, but I went to her because I needed her to understand what I was capable of doing. And also giving her a timeline. So like for the next 3 months, this is what's happening. I need to work out a flexible schedule with you. With certain events, I might need extra help. So before you speak to, I would start with your immediate supervisor if you can. I would already have a plan in hand, like understanding if I have doctor's appointments, is it 6 months out? Letting them know, because sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, or saying, look, I'm unsure of when these appointments are, but they're going to be monthly and I need some more flexibility. I need some accommodations. What are these are the accommodations I need. Like, well, this is why I said, these are the accommodations I need. This is what I can do. And this is where I need support. So I really laid it out so she had an understanding and she could look at not just my immediate need, but future needs and where would somebody else have to either cover for me or maybe even, reschedule things. And that's going to happen. But I also let her know there might be, and I said might, there might be a time where I cannot do, and it just, I get a flare up. I can't tell you when I'm going to get that. So I need you to understand it.
I think that's huge, truly. And a lot of it is going to come from, like you said, kind of the courage of your convictions that this is something you need. And I know that a lot of people feel that need to even further either minimize or mask when it comes to asking for accommodations, right?
Yeah.
Because it's scary and it's really difficult to know, especially if you've never seen it modeled by either a fellow coworker or somebody else at your org. It's really difficult to know, like, okay, am I asking too much? And I love what you said about kind of laying out the knowns as well as the sort of known unknowns of like, hey, I know I'm going to have doctor's appointments coming up. I can't tell you what times they are now because they're not scheduled yet. Or, there might be days where I truly just can't. Please understand that if I can do something, I will be there. I'm not going to show up if I can't, function or if I'm going to be a detriment to the team, but I'm trying my absolute best. Please understand that. And
Yeah.
that really changed a lot of the conversations, at least for me, because it was a lot easier to come to a meeting and tell someone, I'm having a rough day. I am here, but I am very fuzzy. So apologies if I ask you to repeat things multiple times. I am trying to focus. It's just very difficult for me to like string meaning together out of your sentences. And it feels
Exactly.
clunky and it feels weird. And I felt like a toddler. But that communicated to other people what to expect, because that's what I could identify. And
Yeah.
do you also feel like this, where you feel like when you're not an expert on your situation or what your day is going to look like, do
Mhm.
you feel like that hurts you? Like it makes it harder for you to kind of do this level setting with your team or with coworkers?
Yeah, it does. It feels like, because again, it could happen. You could have a great morning, and by 12 or 1, you get a flare up or something, you ate something, or just something happened and it affected you or triggered. I mean, this is the other thing we don't realize, is that people have different triggers, right? Whether it's physical or mental. So anything can change. So just because someone is great in the morning doesn't mean, I mean, just anyone, right? Somebody could be having a bad day and somehow we relate to it. We have to relate to that on a higher level and understand that this person's having more than a bad day. They're having something that I can't understand. And one of the best questions someone can ask, if you're a team member, if you're an employer, how can I support you in this? I mean, that's the best thing you can say to anyone. How can I support you in this? Not making it an issue, not, spotlighting it, but how can I support you? And what do you need to have in place in order for you to do your job? Those are the questions to really think about. If you are managing a team and someone has a chronic illness or mental health, you have to just ask that. And I know that it's easier to talk about something that's physical than mental, right? So, and it's because we still have this stigma around this. And so the best thing you can do, again, if you are managing group teams and you are a manager, supervisor, you're a leader, really, how can I support you and what do you need to have in place for you to be able to do your job? Those are two simple questions. It shows empathy, but it also lets that person be part of, it helps you to be part of planning for them, right? Because they may not know what they need in that moment and they need to think about it and come back to you and say, here's what I need. And I think what COVID has done is, and even though things are changing, we're going back, doesn't mean we have to stop having that grace we've had for people and situations. We still could do that. It doesn't, just because things are getting better doesn't mean we have to change how we have been patient, some of us, with others, and understanding that. And I think remote work, what we've seen is that people can do their work remotely. You just give them the tools and the resources that they need. The other thing I want to add, because I should have mentioned about, especially if you're doing a project and like this is due then, if you can, when you're feeling well enough, do as much as you can so that when you have you're having an episode or again a flare up or whatever it may be, that at least you've done the most that you need to. So I try to do as much as I can when I'm feeling great, so that when I don't feel well, at least some of the things I have. And think about too, like if you really can't take a meeting, if there's someone else who could stand in your place for that meeting, I think that's important too, that you speak to your employer about having a team member or someone who can back you up. And then we start to worry, right? Especially if you are a leader, you start to worry, is somebody gunning for my job because now they think that I can't do it. So all these things, you have to, if you want to look at things through our lens, we have all these things going through our head at any given time. We're worried about our job security. We're worried about our health. We're also worried about even how our family members relate to us having this. So there's so much going on.
Oh, there we go. found my mute button. This happens
Yeah.
at least once every couple of weeks. So, okay. So I cannot relate hard enough to this. And you're right. It's so crucial to, as you know, as a, I won't say outsider, but as someone who is working with someone with a chronic illness or chronic condition, that distinction between let me know if I can help and what can I do to support you, it's huge. It's absolutely massive because you've opened the door instead of, asking like, hey, are you okay? And, giving the generally kind of peer pressured response of, yeah, everything's fine. It's great. That's so much more effective. I absolutely love that. Carletta is also agreeing with you in the chat saying these are some really great suggestions for leaders. Carletta said, my mental health was impacted more because I was concerned about not doing well and losing a job that paid for my health insurance. And that is a massive thing for so many people. There's so many of us who I'm so thankful that I am in a position of privilege where I don't have to worry about these kinds of things, because that's why I get to be where I am, because I have this unique perspective. But it's also a very real concern for so many people who don't have that security, who don't have, the luxury, or they're not resourced enough to be able to take these chances. Now, let's go back and talk a little bit about how you advocated for your needs in a professional environment. Now, this I feel like is, for me, it feels very similar to negotiating, which I'm not very good at yet. I'm still trying to gain more skills there. When you are advocating, or when you have advocated for your needs, how have you phrased that conversation? What things should people keep in mind if they are trying to figure out how to have that conversation with their employer, with their direct report, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to first work on yourself, like work on, okay, what is happening right now? Like really be mindful about this is what's happening, because sometimes something's happening to us and we're just like, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm gonna work through this. Just be honest with yourself. This is what I'm dealing with right now. Once you're in that place, then you can start to have these conversations. But if you're not there yet, you're going to struggle, because you're kind of like weaving between I'm okay and I'm not okay, and you're trying to put on a brave front. And so then people don't know what's going on and you're more stressed. It affects your mental health. Not everyone around you is just like, what's going on with this person? Deal with you first, because this is a priority. Once everything you feel like, okay, I have the right doctor, I have the right treatment, I understand what's happening. Now I can start to talk about it. Because if you do that before then, even when people are asking you questions, you won't know what to answer. You won't know what to do, because you're still, you're joining support groups, you're on different, websites reading about other people who have your disease, and you're just all over the place. So once you're in that place mentally where you say, okay, now I understand what I'm dealing with, now I can go back and talk about it. So what I did was really talked about, this is what I need. I understand, this is the treatments I know these are the 4 times a year I'm going to have this. But in between that, I may have flare-ups. So what I need to do is, I need to write out what my tasks are, like what my responsibilities are, so that you know exactly what my day looks like. And it's not perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be, 9 to 10, I do this, but know what you do throughout the day. And are there any upcoming meetings? Are there any upcoming projects? So I need you to know that for this project, I may have a doctor's appointment. So what do you need from me beforehand? For this meeting, is there anything you need me to prepare for the meeting beforehand? Because again, I may not be there. So just having, I think I would say, and this was it. I kind of had like this imperfect playbook, right? It was like Marie's playbook. It wasn't perfect, but this is Marie's playbook for how I'm going to manage this and how I'm going to work with, my company, even how I work with my co-founder. This is the playbook. This is what you need. This is all the information you need to have beforehand, so that when I'm not well, you at least have you know what to do. You don't have to call me on my day off. You don't have to feel like somehow I dropped the ball. And if I do, please understand it wasn't intentional. If I do drop the ball, let's have a conversation about it so I know how to better prepare next time. And maybe I can't, but I need you to know that it wasn't intentional and I'm sorry. So kind of having this playbook where if this happens, then that, right? If this happens, then that kind. And that's really how you have to think, because you really can't say this is going to be perfect. And on Wednesdays, I know I have flare-ups, and on Fridays, I'm good. You can't say that. So having this playbook where you can say, these are all the things you need to know about what I do. And in case of, it's kind of like just having that, when you're in school, in case of emergency or anything, who do you contact? So you have to do it for your job. In case of this, here's what you need to know or need to do. If you're having a flare-up, maybe just sending a simple email. Today I'm not feeling well. These are the clients I need to follow up with, or this is whatever, and I'll have it done by then. And give yourself enough of a cushion. So for example, let's say you are an administrative assistant and know that I'm not feeling well. I have all these, I had so much stuff in administration to do. I got paperwork, I got all this. What do I need to do in place for this to work out? So having that playbook and saying, hey, if this doesn't work out, by what day do you need this out? If I need it by Friday, I might not be in on Friday. So who else can do that? There's always somebody else that can do it. I think that's the other part, is that employers and even us, we feel like no one else can do it. Mm-hmm. And is that the truth? Like, I really feel that there's too much pressure put on employees to be the only, you're the expert. I may be, but if I'm not here, wouldn't you just find somebody else to do my job?
So, exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's why this is hard, right? Because if we need the health insurance, we are trying so hard to do our best so that we don't lose it. But at the same time, we know that from the employee's perspective, you are replaceable. And that's what makes it difficult too. And you have to start thinking, how do I manage this? And if it's not the right place for you, then you have to start looking for the right place, because you don't want to have that stress. You can't have that stress. You have to find the place that works and that is understanding, and you don't have to constantly be worried about this. That's too much.
Of course. Well, and that's kind of something to keep in mind, right? As you're going into or kind of brainstorming how you're going to have this or what you want to talk about in this meeting with, like you said, like your immediate supervisor or your teammates. Being proactive is huge. It's incredibly hard, but it is huge. Because like you said, if you can kind of take on the things that you can take on in the day, hopefully you're not already at a point where you are stressed to the hilt and then the wheels fall off. And then you're like, it's not just a mess, it's a mess. So when it comes to those kinds of things, like, has it also been hard for you to be proactive, especially at the start?
Yeah, it has. It was hard to be proactive. And it's so funny because there's people that mess up, right? And they're fine.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
But we're so hard on ourselves and saying, oh my gosh, I messed this up. I didn't pull through, or I have to show up in this way. And I look back now, I was like, it wasn't worth any of it, because what happens, and then you have to think about this too, it takes you longer to heal when you don't give yourself that time.
Prevention's better than a cure.
Exactly. So if you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to work through this, I don't feel well, instead of 2 days, it's going to be 5 or 7 days now, because you have just pushed your body and mind to the extent, and you can't. We're not, I think I said my favorite quote is, if you don't listen to your body when it whispers, you're going to have to hear it when it screams. And I think that's right?
I like that. Quote. I'm taking that. That's a good one.
And I say it to myself too. And I say to myself, especially at home, because we don't talk about that work-life balance. It could be hard at home too, because my family doesn't understand it, even though they've read about it, they still don't understand these kind of invisible illness. And it's like, okay, I know you have this, I see it, I see when you're not well, but I still don't get it because you don't look sick. I think that's the worst thing you can say to someone. You don't look sick.
Yeah, especially when like I don't wear makeup to work for 2 days and people are like, do you, I mean, not anymore, thankfully, but like they'll look at you and be like, are you okay? Are you tired? Are you
Yeah,
getting
so
sick?
funny.
Like, well, no, this is just how my face looks. And if this is how you think I should look when I'm sick, then I've got a lot of questions.
Exactly. It's like, oh, unless you are just like really,
At death's
like you
door,
said,
right?
yeah, your
Ugh.
face, your skin is dull, your eyes are red, and you just are looking tired, then people just assume you're fine, you're okay. And another thing I want to add to that's
Yeah, please.
come up is if you know somebody who has the same illness as the person you're speaking to, don't make a comment. It's very simple. Don't comment about unless it's a family member, you have an understanding about it. Even then, everyone is different. So just don't try to relate to us by saying, oh, you know what? My cousin's brother's girlfriend had that. That doesn't help my situation at all.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I think people try to be relatable, like, oh, I've heard about that. It's not a song, it's my life, like you can't just talk about it or talk
Well,
about it to me.
and it, for me, I mean, and I'm sure it's different for everybody, but for me, I would much rather someone ask, like, so like with my husband and his type 1 diabetes, none of my family had any, experience with this. And so when we first started dating, my sisters were absolutely fascinated by all of like the injections and the port he had for insulin and all this stuff. And I remember one of my mom's friends saying something about, oh yeah, I'm at risk for type 2 diabetes. So I totally get it. You're not having to take shots. This type 2 is coming out of, either other underlying health conditions and or not great eating habits, not great exercising habits. This isn't, you don't want to say it's something you did to yourself, but it is certainly not the same experience. So personally, I prefer some variation on like, oh, I have a friend that has something similar and she says it's like this. Do you also have that? Is that something that I could do for you as well? More couching it in that place of how can I support you, as opposed to, don't worry, you don't have to explain anything to me because I already know.
Yeah, like I'm an expert. Or also, do not send people like videos, YouTube, or links to this is how you can treat it.
Oh yeah.
Everyone is, it's, yeah.
Unless we are friends who have previously discussed like healthcare issues, I don't want to talk to you about Western medicine versus Eastern medicine. Yeah. That's a huge conversation that I don't even really want to have with my doctor. And that's who I'm supposed to be having it with.
Exactly.
So, right before the staff meeting is not really a great time to be like, oh, have you also tried acupuncture?
Yeah, exactly. And also, during the spotlight shouldn't be on the person. If they come back, you can ask them privately, hey, how are you feeling? Like, what's going on? I did want to mention something I should have talked when you mentioned about the American Diabetes Act. There are some chronic that we don't label as chronic illness. Some people have severe food allergies that fall under the ADA. So in that case, if you are in HR or if you're a supervisor, you have to know that, because let's say somebody brings in I know people who have airborne fish allergies, meaning if anybody in the office is eating fish, it affects them. Yeah. And again, food allergies, they're not people that are being, I noticed that too. There's a lot of jokes. If you even see on TV, it makes fun of kids with peanut allergies. It seems like, these are real, and it falls under the American Diabetes Act. So be mindful of that too. That if
you mean the American Disabilities Act?
Disability.
It's okay. I do the same thing too. I totally do that too. Yes.
Oh gosh. And I tell you, my brain is fuzzy, but, and this is why it's good to have this now, because then you can see how it impacts someone. But thank you. American Disabilities Act, that is something that you should read up on if you have an employee that has a food allergy, so you understand because people are going back into the office, if somebody brings in something that someone's severely allergic to, it could be something,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
not just, oh, let me get them the EpiPen. Some people have
Yeah.
very bad allergies. So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So I'm still keeping my eye on the chat. We've got about a little less than 10 minutes left before we need to wrap up. This always goes way too quickly. And even with an hour, I still feel like we could talk for another hour and a half.
Yeah.
All right. So, and Tiffany is also commenting, when people do that, it almost feels like there was just some fix and you should have known. And now you know, and if you don't take me up on this holistic, suggestion or a diet or whatever, that you're making yourself be this way because it could be so easy.
Exactly.
That is toxic as all get out. And I wish that I had not experienced that. And I wish no one had to experience that.
Yeah. And you've touched on toxic positivity.
Oh God, yes.
When people say something, like you say, oh my gosh, my body hurts all over. Oh, well, try not to think about it, or take a Tylenol or leave, then you'll feel better, or just go lie down. Or just trying to find the positive out of something. And I get that people want to make you feel better, but that's not necessarily what people need. And sometimes it's best to, if you're unsure what to say, then don't say anything. That's what I go with. If you're not sure what you should say, then maybe not to say anything. But the toxic positivity of trying to find, the bright side of something, that may not be what somebody needs at that moment. There are times that it works, but don't think that this is a solution.
And there's other times, that toxic positivity, I get it, but you can't be trying so hard to focus on the light that you ignore the dark, because that's where all this other stuff hides. And that's where you're going to be at some point. And if that's where you are and you've spent all of your time trying to kind of ignore it or work through or whatever, you're not going to know what to do when you are absolutely in the dark. Pitch black, you don't know where you're going. You've never been there before. It does not feel familiar because now everything is terrible.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And that's what, and people, if you have a department that you're running and you want it to be this inclusive space, think about the first question to ask, am I making this a psychologically trusted space for everyone here? And not just based on race and gender and sexual identity. You have to think there's so many intersecting identities of people. So you have to ask yourself, is this a psychologically safe or trusted space for someone with a chronic illness? If not, how can I make this space this way? If you are in HR, that's a question to ask yourself too. How do I address this and break these stigmas around mental illness and physical illness and chronic illness? What do I need to do so that people feel safe in this space to be transparent, to be vulnerable?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it's looked a lot like trying to, do my best to sort of verbalize, if not very clearly explain what I'm dealing with that day. But a lot of it for me is kind of being that person that sort of reiterates with, yeah, it's not great, but it's okay that it's not great. And if you are also struggling for something to say back, especially if somebody is, with the best of intentions, trying so hard to get you to, try this diet or try that, whatever. Personally, thanks so much. You've given me a lot to think about. I started using that when I was getting married and had to make a whole bunch of choices about a stupid party that no one agreed with. And I'm telling you, it is just as effective when somebody's trying to give you, the latest self-help book or whatever. Keep that in your back pocket. It's way easier than sitting there and going, I don't know how to get out of this conversation.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. And honestly, we spend most of our waking hours at work, right? So these are the people, whether we like all of them or not, these are the people we are spending time with. So how can I work with them in a way so that they understand, but that they also respect my boundaries? And so it's always finding that sweet spot where, here's the thing, it's never going to be perfect. And that's the first thing to tell yourself. This is not going to be perfect, and it's going to look different for everyone. So I cannot speak on behalf of other people. I can only say this is what I've done that works for me. But as long as you come from that place of understanding your needs, and or even still, if you're trying to figure out your needs, that's where you lead from. It's
Yeah.
not perfect.
Yeah, of course. All right, so we only have 6 minutes left. I want to get to one more question if possible. So that way we can make sure we let people know how to connect with you, how to follow you, see what you're up to. You talked about how rest is hugely important. For me, this wasn't made concrete until I heard about spoon theory and then fork theory, which has since developed to kind of go along with. As someone from the chronic illness community, I'm sure you're well aware. In case other people are not well aware, you can just Google spoon theory and fork theory. Christine something, I can't remember her name, was the one that invented the spoon theory. But when it taught, so if you have those ideas, or you have, kind of concrete explanations for yourself about like, how to maybe be more mindful of what you're going to need, all that kind of stuff. Rest is clearly important. That's a huge factor. But what in your life have you kind of cultivated, like activities or habits that either recharge or energize, or even just don't make it worse for you? What do you do?
First, okay, we talked about rest. I do meditate. I practice yoga when my body feels it can. I set and enforce and reinforce boundaries, because that has been my saving grace, is really enforcing those boundaries and pushing back. The other thing I've learned to do too is just read, write, and just take it easy. Like, I don't have to always be doing something. I used to think like I always have to be doing something. Otherwise it looks like you mentioned laziness a little earlier. Like, yeah, I don't want to seem like I'm lazy, and I don't want people to think, but I've learned to just say, it's okay. I'll chill. I'll watch. Like, last week after my treatment, I just sat there and I binged on Inventing Anna on Netflix, and it was the best thing. So these little things that bring you joy, find the things that bring you joy, have your little joy, your joy box, your joy tool, something where, when I need this, what is going to make me happy? It was even something as silly as my son had this little toy that was so cute that I actually put it next to my nightstand, so that if I need a good laugh, I look at it, and it's those little things. And you just have to find, oh, you know what, this makes me feel good, so I'm going to add this to my little, virtual or real toolbox,
Yeah,
whatever it is
absolutely.
that makes you feel good. And honestly, the other thing too is just stay away from people who take your energy away too.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not feeling well, don't engage with anyone that is, what is it? I think they're called they're energy
Yes.
vampires.
Energy vampires.
Yeah,
Yes.
stay away from them, because you're just going to get more tired, and it's just gonna, no, you
No,
need to
it's
just
not worth
support
it.
yourself and find what brings you joy in that moment, what gets you to think, not think about how you're feeling, or be so in your body, or if you need to, because sometimes I meditate so I could feel like, where is that pain? What am I feeling right now? Just so I can address it and know, okay, I'm feeling this. This is what I need right this moment. But some people, that doesn't work for them. They need to distract themselves. So figure out which one of the two works for you. Is it distraction, or is it really being intentional and being mindful about, this is what I'm feeling, and I'm just going to focus on that and focus on healing that. And
Yeah.
that's it. It's again, it's imperfectly perfect if
Yeah.
you think about it. But do what works for you, and honestly, live your truth. And that means something different for everyone. If it means not sharing or disclosing, then don't. And if it does mean disclosing, then do, but don't let people tell you who you are. You
Yeah.
let them know. Yeah.
Now, I know that a lot of people, especially if you're trying to set these boundaries, or you are trying to communicate these, the needs that you have, it can be really tempting to, at least for me, overshare a bit, or at least beyond what some people
Yeah.
would what is required basically. And I'll go a little bit further than that, mostly because I'm either trying to impress on someone like, this is very important to me. I take I take my, my diagnosis very seriously. And some people are very private. So like there have been friends or groups of people that I have asked me about things like this that I've just said, hey, yes, this is a condition I live with, but it's private to me. I really don't want to talk about it. It's boring to talk about other people's health problems anyway. What's going on with you? And I'll misdirect. But the other thing that's important to know is that like, it's not all or nothing, right? You can share and get to a point and realize, nope, that's enough.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's really what you feel, what you're comfortable with. It's your comfort level. And if you feel like, I've done that too. I've overshared. There's times I said, oh my God, I went a little too far with that. But then the person has an understanding. And there's times where I've just been very, quick. This is it. That's it. And people want to know. I think
Oh yeah,
there's a curiosity, right? That people are
for
like,
sure.
what does she have? What is that?
Oh yeah.
And what do you need with that information? And that's what I want to know. Like, how's that information going to help you? Is it going to make
Yeah.
you do your job better? Is it going to make me do my job better? But please, if anything, if I want to end this with urging anybody who's in leadership, HR, let's change the narrative in the workplace about these invisible illness, whether they're mental or physical. Let's start to change the narrative. And it doesn't have to, we can't change society, but you can change your work culture. So start there and start making it a place where people can talk about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marie. This has been amazing. I'm so honored to have been able to spend the last hour with you. Where can people follow you? Where can they, hear about what you've got going on, check into Esteem? What do you want people to know before they leave?
Sure. It's marie@esteem.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Marie Roker Jones, and pretty much everywhere else is Marie Roker Jones. And I love connecting with people. So reach out and let's chat.